It was just after 8 p.m. when it happened, one of those evenings that felt entirely unremarkable in every sense. The kind where the air is still, the clouds hang heavy but harmless, and the world seems to collectively exhale as night settles in. The town, small, quiet, unassuming, had slipped comfortably into its nightly rhythm. Lights in kitchen windows glowed softly against the growing dark. Radios played low in the background. Families gathered around dinner tables, or relaxed on couches with the television murmuring in the distance. The last hints of daylight had long faded from the sky, replaced by that deep indigo hue that sits between twilight and true night. Everything about that moment felt ordinary, reassuringly so. The kind of calm that lulls you into thinking nothing unusual could ever happen here. And then the sky lit up. Not just a flicker. Not a subtle shimmer like distant lightning. No, it was sudden, sharp, and uncomfortably vivid. A blinding white light erupted from above, flooding the landscape in a brilliant, almost artificial glow. Shadows that hadn't existed a second earlier stretched long and distorted across lawns, rooftops, and tree trunks. For the briefest of moments, the entire town looked like it had been placed beneath the harsh flash of a massive camera, as if the sky itself had taken a picture. Cars, buildings, fences, everything was cast in stark contrast, frozen in the kind of clarity that doesn't feel natural at all. It wasn't just bright. It was wrong. Like something was out of place with reality. But the light wasn't the only strange thing. What made it terrifying, what made it unforgettable, was the silence. There was no thunderclap. No gust of wind. No buzzing or humming from some man-made source. There was no mechanical whir in the sky. No roar of jets or helicopters overhead. Not even the distant hum of power lines vibrating with energy. It was pure silence. Thick, unnatural silence. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful, but suffocating. It swallowed every other sound, the chirping of crickets, the rustling of leaves, even the occasional barking dog. All of it vanished in that moment. People who were inside felt it first as a strange shift in atmosphere. Those outdoors froze where they stood, staring upward with wide eyes and open mouths. Some dropped whatever they were holding. Others gasped. A few reached instinctively for their phones, though it's unclear whether anyone managed to capture it in time. And just as suddenly as it came, the light disappeared. Not with a slow fade. Not with a flicker. It just stopped. Like someone had flipped a switch and turned off the sun. Darkness rushed back in like a tide, heavy and jarring. But something was different now. Something about the world felt off. As if reality had skipped a beat, and no one was quite sure if it had returned to normal. The sky showed no signs of storm clouds. No signs of movement. No trace of anything that could explain what had just occurred. No smoke. No burning smell. No crash. No debris. It was as though the flash had never happened. Except it had. Everyone knew it had. Everyone felt it, saw it. And yet, there was nothing. Not even a lingering glow on the horizon. No aftershock. No explanation. People came out of their homes slowly, hesitantly. Neighbors looked to one another, as if seeking confirmation that they hadn't just imagined the whole thing. Some stood on their lawns with furrowed brows, shielding their eyes and scanning the sky for drones, satellites, anything. Others whispered or called loved ones, trying to describe what had just happened, stumbling over their words. A few immediately turned to social media, their posts echoing the same phrase over and over again. Did anyone else see that? And all the while, the sky remained still. Empty. Deceptively calm. No emergency alerts were issued. No breaking news reports. The weather radar showed nothing unusual, no storm systems, no lightning strikes, no meteor activity. Local power grids hadn't surged. There were no outages. No alarms. No official statements. Even security cameras around town flickered with the sudden brightness but failed to catch anything from above. No aircraft had been tracked overhead at the time of the incident. No military drills. No fireworks displays. Not even a shooting star. There was no logical source. And that's what unsettled people the most. Because they had seen it, dozens, maybe hundreds across the region. A brilliant, silent flash that lit up the night and vanished without a trace. And not one person could say where it came from, or what caused it, or even how to begin explaining it. It was too fast to record. Too quiet to trace. Too bizarre to believe. But the memory remained, burned into their minds like the afterimage of a staring contest with the sun. The next morning, nothing looked different. The sun rose on cue. Birds sang. The world spun forward as if nothing had happened. But for those who witnessed it, the night before had shifted something deep inside. That moment, those few seconds when the sky exploded with light and then returned to stillness, would not be forgotten. It lingered in their thoughts, gnawed at their curiosity, unsettled their sense of how the world was supposed to work. Because what they saw was real. It wasn't imagined. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a coincidence. The sky had flashed with light, but there was no storm, no sound, no source. And whatever it was, it had arrived without warning. Before we continue, we would like to encourage you to consider liking the video and subscribing. In the days that followed, curiosity gave way to speculation. The phenomenon refused to fade from conversation, clinging to the minds of those who had witnessed it, and even those who had not. Some shrugged it off as an anomaly, an odd trick of the atmosphere, something rare, but ultimately explainable. Others weren't so quick to dismiss it. As social media threads lengthened and local forums filled with fragmented eyewitness accounts, a pattern began to emerge, not of hard facts, but of shared disbelief. People needed answers. They needed something, anything, to make sense of what they had seen. And slowly, a single possibility began to circulate with more frequency, one that at first sounded harmless, almost mundane in comparison to the bizarre nature of the event. But the more it was discussed, the more unsettling it became. That theory was atmospheric electricity. To most people, the term doesn't mean much. It conjures vague images of lightning storms and static shocks, everyday phenomena we've long grown used to. But the truth is, the electrical behavior of the atmosphere is a field far less understood than we like to admit. Our skies are filled with complex and constantly shifting electromagnetic interactions, invisible currents that stretch across continents and pulse through layers of clouds and air. The Earth, as it turns out, is not a passive rock floating through space. It is a living system, wrapped in a blanket of charged particles, interacting with the sun, with solar wind, with its own magnetic field. And once in a while, those interactions do something unexpected. In certain extremely rare conditions that scientists still struggle to fully reproduce or predict, massive releases of electrical energy can occur above the cloud line, sometimes even in completely clear skies. These aren't your standard lightning bolts. They don't necessarily need a thunderhead or a storm system to initiate. They can occur in the upper atmosphere, beyond the range of our typical weather patterns, triggered by shifts in temperature, pressure, or even disturbances in the Earth's magnetic field. These flashes of light, known in scientific terms as transient luminous events, include phenomena like sprites, jets, and elves, exotic forms of lightning that seem to defy our usual understanding of how storms work. Sprites, for example, are brief, massive electrical discharges that shoot upward from the tops of thunderstorms, reaching towards space rather than arcing down to the ground. They're usually red or pink in color and can span tens of kilometers in height, lasting only a few milliseconds, but bright enough to be seen from hundreds of miles away if conditions are right. Blue jets are narrower, often invisible to the naked eye, piercing through the stratosphere like needles of energy. And elves, short for emissions of light and very low-frequency perturbations due to electromagnetic pulse sources, form glowing rings of light that can stretch across a diameter of 300 kilometers or more, blooming in the sky like giant halos. Most people never see them. They're fast, they're high up, and they usually require very specific instruments to detect. But what if something similar had happened that night? What if, just for a moment, the atmosphere over that small town had released a pulse of energy, an enormous, silent burst of light triggered by conditions we don't yet understand. It would explain the brightness. It might explain the silence. And it wouldn't require any visible storm to be present. The skies could have been deceptively calm, with no thunderclouds to warn of what was about to unfold. In that case, the light wasn't unnatural at all, it was simply unfamiliar. A natural, albeit rare, display of electrical behavior that few ever witness and even fewer recognize for what it is. Still, there's something about that explanation that leaves people unsatisfied. Maybe it's the word natural. It sounds too easy, too convenient, especially for something that felt so deeply wrong. Witnesses swear it didn't look like lightning, or anything even close to it. The light wasn't jagged or flickering. It didn't split the sky or flash in multiple directions. It was uniform, blinding, and all-consuming, like standing in the path of a white-hot wave that passed through the world without touching it. And then there's the silence. Even the most exotic types of high-altitude lightning are usually accompanied by some sound, distant rumbles, electromagnetic interference, a static charge in the air. But this event? Nothing. No sound. No static. Just light, and then darkness. So maybe it was atmospheric electricity. Maybe the sky was simply doing something it rarely does, something we haven't learned to predict. A strange pulse from the heavens, misunderstood only because it's so rarely seen. That's the comfort offered by this theory, that nature still holds surprises, but not threats. That the flash was rare, yes, but ultimately benign. A silent reminder that the skies above us are more dynamic, more mysterious than we imagine. But even so, for many, the mystery remains untouched. Because sometimes a theory, even a good one, doesn't quite fit the feeling. And what people felt in that moment, what they saw, wasn't just strange. It was something else entirely. And yet, to truly understand how something like this could happen, how a blinding light could explode across the night sky without warning, without sound, and without a visible storm, we have to look deeper into the strange, layered world of upper atmospheric phenomena. Because while the term atmospheric electricity might sound like a catch-all phrase, the systems it refers to are anything but simple. They are vast, delicate, and often invisible, stitched into the very fabric of Earth's interaction with space itself. Above us, the ionosphere hums with electric potential. This region, beginning roughly 60 kilometers above the ground and extending hundreds of kilometers into space, is constantly alive with charged particles, most of them born from solar radiation. During the day, sunlight energizes this region into a shimmering veil of plasma. But at night, when the sun's direct influence fades, the ionosphere doesn't go quiet, it shifts into another, more volatile state. Within this realm, electric fields can stretch for thousands of kilometers, creating channels of potential energy that we only dimly understand. Under certain conditions, energy builds, slowly, silently, invisibly, until it reaches a tipping point. That release may manifest as one of the rare transient luminous events we've barely begun to catalog. Or, as some researchers have speculated, there may be entire classes of electrical outbursts we've yet to even identify, phenomena that don't fit neatly into our categories of sprites or jets, but occur only under the most obscure, infrequent circumstances. This would make them extraordinarily difficult to study. And when they do appear, when all the delicate environmental factors align, they might do so over remote areas, or sparsely populated regions, leaving behind only a smattering of eyewitnesses who are left grappling with what they saw. Consider the idea of electrical discharge across dry air. Under normal conditions, our atmosphere acts as an insulator. The air molecules are too dispersed, too stable, to allow free movement of electrons over long distances. But in highly unusual scenarios, say, during a shift in upper atmospheric pressure, or after a subtle increase in cosmic ray activity, this balance can break. A field of energy might be released not downward, like lightning, but outward, horizontally, or even spherically, radiating a sudden flash of white-blue brilliance. This kind of pulse wouldn't follow the familiar bolt-shaped path of standard lightning. It would be diffused, immersive. Blinding, yes, but not in a single line or arc, It would envelop everything, instantaneously, before vanishing as quickly as it arrived. There's also the matter of electromagnetic coupling. Beneath the surface of the Earth, currents flow deep within the crust, especially around fault zones or tectonic boundaries. It's a phenomenon known as telluric current, subterranean streams of electricity that naturally move through rock and soil. While slow and subtle under ordinary conditions, these currents can, in theory, interact with upper atmospheric charges through a process known as lithosphere-atmosphere-ionosphere coupling. Essentially, stress within the Earth's crust, perhaps due to minor tectonic shifts or pressure buildup, can trigger changes in the air above, creating invisible pathways for electrical discharge to suddenly erupt into light. It's a concept still under study, still largely theoretical. But if such a coupling occurred that night, it would mean the light in the sky wasn't simply a product of weather. It was part of a deeper, more interconnected system, one that tied the ground beneath our feet to the heavens above. Adding to the complexity is the possibility of local atmospheric distortions, rare temperature inversions or humidity differentials that create optical effects difficult to reproduce. These conditions can bend and magnify light, making even small discharges appear far more intense than they are in reality. A discharge that would normally occur in a narrow channel could be reflected, refracted, and amplified by the presence of suspended ice crystals or layers of differing air density, turning a brief flicker into a hemisphere-wide flash. This would also help explain the uniformity of the light as reported by witnesses, the sense that it came from everywhere at once, rather than from a single bolt or direction. These are subtle interactions, but their impact on perception can be profound. What makes atmospheric electricity so compelling as a theory, yet so frustrating, is how elusive it is. Many of these events last less than a second. They don't leave scorch marks. They don't shatter trees or blast holes in the ground. They vanish without a trace. And without a dozen camera angles or calibrated instruments aimed at the right place at the right time, they are almost impossible to confirm. Which leaves us in an awkward position, leaning on science to explain what science hasn't quite caught up with yet. It's not that these events aren't real. It's that they live at the fringes of our technological gaze, where our satellites don't always point, where our instruments aren't always listening. And so they pass us by like ghosts in the night, leaving behind only questions and flickering memories. Still, for all the complexity of this theory, for all the intricate dance of particles and fields, many find themselves circling back to one central point, that what occurred that night wasn't entirely beyond the realm of possibility. It was strange, yes, unexpected, unsettling, but not necessarily unnatural. It may have been a rare combination of atmospheric conditions, solar influences, geomagnetic anomalies, and electrical potential that fused, briefly, into a moment of brilliance. A white-hot bloom in the upper sky, unleashed not by malice or mystery, but by the Earth itself, in one of its rarest moods. And yet, even as this explanation settles into the minds of the more scientifically inclined, even as it offers a foothold in the avalanche of confusion, one nagging thought remains: why there? Why then? Why so many witnesses all at once? But for all the sophistication of the atmospheric electricity theory, for all its intricacies and its interwoven systems of plasma, particles, and hidden charges, there remains a quiet discomfort in some corners of the scientific community, a restlessness, even. Because while that explanation offers structure, it lacks something crucial, a sense of intent. A moment that so thoroughly defies our daily experience, so silent, so sudden, so surgically precise in its appearance, demands something more than mechanisms and models. It begs for motive, or, at least, meaning. And in the absence of sound, in the absence of storm, in the absence of a cause that we can track or replicate, our gaze inevitably drifts upward once more, but this time, higher. Not just to the atmosphere, but far beyond it. Into orbit. Into the dark silence of space. Because what if, on that still, quiet night, the source of that flash wasn't below the clouds or hidden in the electric soup of the upper atmosphere, but descending from the stars? The theory begins not with speculation, but with surveillance, an awareness that we live under the constant watch of orbiting eyes. Thousands of satellites now circle the Earth, many of them benign. Weather trackers, communication relays, scientific instruments humming away in their eternal circuits. But others, we know, are not so innocent. For decades, nations have sent unmarked hardware into space, vehicles whose official purposes are classified, whose missions are routine, but whose existence sparks deep curiosity in those who track their orbits. These silent machines drift through the upper reaches of Earth's orbit, equipped with technology the public never sees, sensors whose capabilities are rarely disclosed, and intentions that may remain forever shrouded in secrecy. It's here, within this hushed network of orbital technology, that the second theory takes root, a theory that suggests the flash that lit the sky that night wasn't a natural occurrence at all, but the accidental byproduct of human machinery in the heavens. Some have called it a satellite anomaly. Others, a covert test gone awry. But the core idea remains consistent. Something happened up there, in orbit, that night. Something that should not have been visible. Something that was never meant to be noticed. Think for a moment of the complexity of modern satellites. These are not simple machines. They are engineered with layers of shielding, propulsion, communication arrays, thermal regulation systems, and in many cases, highly specialized instruments designed to observe, scan, or manipulate. Many operate autonomously, running pre-programmed protocols and adjusting their paths with minimal human oversight. Most rely on power drawn from the sun, stored in intricate battery systems designed to handle immense charge-discharge cycles in the harsh vacuum of space. But these batteries, especially in older, aging satellites, can become unstable. A solar flare that went undetected. A malfunction in the charging cycle. A sudden drop in temperature as the satellite passed into Earth's shadow. Any one of these could, under the right circumstances, cause a catastrophic failure. A surge. An overload. And in that moment, just a heartbeat of time, a satellite could erupt in an explosion of white-hot light. Now consider this. A satellite detonation in low Earth orbit wouldn't create a sonic boom. It wouldn't scatter debris across a city. It would be utterly silent, pure light against the canvas of the stars. But if the angle were just right, if the flash occurred during that narrow window when the satellite was illuminated by the setting sun while the ground below was cloaked in darkness, it would produce exactly what witnesses described. A sky-wide burst of brilliance. A sudden, soundless illumination. An explosion that came not from the Earth, but from the sky, and left no trace behind. Some point to the reports from that night, dozens of observers, spread across a wide region, all describing the same thing. The sky turned white for a moment. The light was even, not jagged. There was no central origin, no bolt, no beam. Just light. It's a signature consistent with what's known in military observation circles as a flaring event. A sudden burst of reflected sunlight caused when a satellite's surface briefly catches the sun at the perfect angle. But while most flares are subtle, momentary glints that pass unnoticed, a high-intensity flare from a large, highly reflective surface, especially one under mechanical stress or in motion, could conceivably create a flash bright enough to illuminate the ground for miles. If that flare came from an experimental satellite outfitted with unknown materials or powered by volatile sources, the resulting light could be unlike anything we've cataloged. And yet, there's an even deeper layer to this theory, one that dips not just into the physical reality of satellites, but into the tightly sealed vaults of geopolitics and defense. There are whispers among analysts that some nations have been testing orbital-based energy systems, technologies that convert solar power into directed energy beams, either for propulsion or, more controversially, as part of next-generation weapons platforms. The idea sounds like science fiction, but prototypes have been discussed for decades. Platforms that harvest energy and then transmit it in focused beams down to Earth for collection, or, under more shadowy applications, for disabling enemy technology. If one of these systems misfired, even for a split second, the result might be a directed burst of energy powerful enough to scatter photons across the sky without ever touching the ground. No explosion. No fire. No crater. Just light, pure and disorienting. Of course, none of this is confirmed. The organizations that manage these satellites rarely, if ever, disclose malfunctions. A failure, especially one that results in a visible event, would be quietly erased, its data buried under layers of plausible deniability. Official channels would issue silence, or perhaps a bland weather explanation, or nothing at all. Because acknowledging the truth would mean admitting that a piece of advanced, potentially classified equipment failed in Earth's orbit, in full view of an unprepared public. That it bled light across the night sky and left people staring, confused, searching the heavens for a reason. There's also the psychological dimension to consider. The mere idea that something above us, something built, launched, and operated in secret, could momentarily override the visual experience of an entire population without explanation is deeply unsettling. It reminds us that the sky is not just a passive canvas. It is populated, monitored, modified. The flash, in this theory, becomes a kind of accidental exposure, not of technology, but of control. A reminder that while we look up expecting constancy, others look down, manipulating what we see from above. And that is perhaps the most disquieting element of all. Because if this flash was the product of a satellite, if it was a technological malfunction or test or miscalculation, then it means someone, somewhere, knows exactly what caused it. And they've chosen not to say. And yet, even as this possibility lingers in the air, it doesn't rest easily. The deeper one falls into the rabbit hole of orbital technology, the more questions begin to crystallize, not about if something could produce such a flash, but why it would. Because while the malfunction of a satellite is one thing, the sheer intensity and nature of the light that was witnessed opens a door to an even more provocative dimension of this theory. What if the flash wasn't an accident at all? Within the classified reaches of space research, those obscure laboratories funded by untraceable budgets, working under names the public never hears, there's a long-standing interest in what's sometimes referred to as space-based illumination. While the phrase might conjure images of solar arrays or reflective panels used to beam light into dark places, the core idea stretches much further. Since the late 20th century, certain defense research programs have explored the possibility of orbitally controlled light sources, devices that could generate powerful bursts of illumination not just as a scientific novelty, but as a form of psychological influence, disorientation, or signal. These would not be weapons in the traditional sense, but tools designed to manipulate the visible environment. Not to harm, but to reveal. Or to confuse. Or perhaps, to send a message only certain eyes would understand. There's historical precedent, oddly enough. During the Cold War, both the United States and the Soviet Union flirted with the idea of creating artificial suns in orbit, massive mirrored satellites that would reflect sunlight down to specific regions at night, extending daylight hours or highlighting battlefields. The most well-known of these was Russia's Znamya project in the 1990s, which tested large space mirrors designed to reflect sunlight to Earth. Though ultimately unsuccessful and largely abandoned, the Znamya tests proved one thing. With enough reflective material and the right orbital conditions, it is entirely possible to momentarily light up the night. And while those early prototypes were crude, today's materials science and engineering capabilities have leapt light years ahead. Ultra-thin, hyper-reflective films. Programmable orbit adjustments. Materials that can endure the extreme temperature swings and radiation of space for decades without degradation. All the tools are now in place. So what if someone, or some agency, has quietly revived the concept? Not to brighten cities, but to observe reactions, to test visibility thresholds, or to simulate conditions under which visibility can be controlled. In such a scenario, the flash isn't a side effect of failure, but the intended outcome of precision-calibrated experimentation. It is, in effect, a test pattern. A calibration signal sent not to the general public, but to those monitoring specific sensors, cameras, or reaction protocols. And to the rest of us? It appears as a mystery, a brief, spectacular burst of untraceable light. This lens also invites an examination of the geographical context. Where, exactly, did this happen? Was it over a population center, or over an expanse of remote wilderness? Did air traffic in the region spike or drop before the flash? Were there known satellite paths or orbital realignments that occurred in the hours leading up to it? Analysts who dig into these questions sometimes uncover fascinating patterns, sudden, unscheduled shifts in known satellite trajectories, or abrupt gaps in public satellite tracking data. There are websites and amateur networks dedicated to watching the skies, logging the movement of every known object in orbit. When these watchers go silent, or when their data hits inexplicable blind spots, it raises eyebrows. It hints at something slipping past the curtain, some object or activity not accounted for by public records. And when that gap aligns with the flash, it begins to feel less like coincidence and more like choreography. Even more intriguing is the idea that the flash might not have been directed at us, but simply over us. That we were, essentially, bystanders, unintended observers of an experiment meant for someone else. This introduces the unsettling possibility that Earth's orbit is no longer just a realm of communication and observation, but a theater of rehearsal. That above our heads, in a place we rarely think about unless launching rockets or receiving weather updates, there is a quiet escalation occurring. Satellites maneuvering, systems activating, light being tested not as illumination, but as a variable, part of a larger simulation, one in which humans on the surface remain largely unaware. It's in these scenarios that the lines between science, surveillance, and strategy begin to blur. Was the flash a calibration of an orbitally based reflector system designed for nighttime imaging? Was it a component of an experimental communication protocol, an ultra-high frequency light pulse only visible under specific conditions? Or was it a form of countermeasure, a brief blinding event meant to disable or disrupt other observation systems, perhaps even terrestrial ones, in a coordinated, time-sensitive operation? The truth is, any of these are feasible. The technology exists. The precedent is there. What's missing is the admission. And perhaps that's the most telling aspect of this entire theory. Because in our age of connectivity and endless information, the most profound mysteries often stem not from a lack of data, but from deliberate omissions. From things that should have been said but weren't. If the flash truly came from an object orbiting Earth, if it was technological, man-made, and intentional, then someone knows. Someone saw the energy output. Someone tracked the anomaly. Someone in some data center, in some hardened underground command room, logged the exact timestamp and triangulated the origin. And if that's the case, then every moment since that flash has been marked by silence not due to ignorance, but choice. This leads to a chilling but undeniably human realization. We don't always get to know what's happening above us. The sky, for all its openness, has become a place of secrets. And every once in a while, something slips through. A crack in the veil. A flash too bright, too perfect, too silent to ignore. And when that moment comes, we're left beneath it, staring upward into the quiet, wondering not just what we saw, but who was watching with us. But what if we dare to entertain a theory not grounded in the boundaries of conventional science or classified aerospace tech? What if, instead of scrutinizing satellites and orbital trajectories, we tilt our perspective just slightly into a realm that, while speculative, is no less enthralling? Because when a phenomenon defies every available explanation, when there's no thunder, no storm, no earthly source, sometimes the most interesting answers come not from what we know, but from what we suspect might be possible. And so, let's open the door to an idea that lies beyond the realm of military strategy or malfunctioning space mirrors, an idea that tugs at the threads of reality itself. There are whispers, quiet, persistent murmurs across obscure corners of the internet, and tucked away in the footnotes of fringe scientific literature, about something called dimensional overlap. A momentary thinning of the veil between worlds, where the boundary between our reality and something adjacent becomes, however briefly, permeable. It's not necessarily the stuff of fantasy novels or Hollywood special effects. The concept has been floated, albeit carefully, by theoretical physicists trying to wrangle with the implications of string theory and the possibility of a multiverse. According to these frameworks, Our universe may be just one of countless others stacked or woven together, each vibrating on slightly different frequencies or occupying imperceptibly different spatial dimensions. In this light, the idea of a flash in the sky takes on an entirely new meaning. Because what if the burst of light wasn't projected into our world, but leaked through it? A radiance not born of combustion or reflection, but of proximity, of another space brushing against ours for the briefest of instants. Think of two soap bubbles drifting in a breeze. When their surfaces touch, there's a shimmer, a momentary distortion, and then separation. The encounter leaves no trace on either bubble, yet for that instant, their boundaries blurred. Apply this to entire realities, entire planes of existence, and the image becomes both mesmerizing and unsettling. A flash in the sky, then, could be the optical residue of such a collision, a brief moment when the laws of one universe momentarily bled into another. Of course, the skeptical mind would balk at this suggestion, and rightly so. We have no instruments designed to detect such intersections. No protocol for identifying light that doesn't originate from a physical source. But that, in itself, is telling. Because the moment you begin to operate outside the known dimensions, length, width, height, time, you are in a space where our instruments, our senses, and even our instincts are fundamentally unequipped. You wouldn't detect such an event through radar or telescope. You wouldn't see it coming. You'd only know it happened because something didn't add up afterward. Because something as simple as the sky flashing with light left nothing behind. No smoke. No thunder. No trajectory. Just absence. And silence. Speculative as it is, the theory of dimensional interaction isn't purely abstract. There have been historical anomalies, well-documented moments where individuals, entire towns even, reported flashes of light or strange atmospheric shifts that were never explained. Events where compass needles spun without magnetic cause. Where shadows moved counter to their light sources. Where, for a heartbeat, the world felt unfamiliar, tilted somehow. These events are typically dismissed as electrical glitches, meteorological mirages, or mass misperceptions. But to those who track such occurrences obsessively, they form a constellation of clues. And at the center of that constellation sits the hypothesis: what if our universe isn't a sealed box, but a hallway? One with doors we don't know are there, doors that open on their own, silently, and close just as quickly? In this framework, the flash isn't just a visual event. It's a symptom. A byproduct of interaction between two fundamentally different energetic systems. Like static electricity crackling when incompatible materials brush past one another. Or like the lens flare on a camera, created not by the scene being filmed, but by how the lens interacts with intense light from just outside its focal range. What we saw in the sky then may have been the artifact of a crossing, a brief, uninvited overlap that left no physical evidence because its cause was never physical to begin with. The implications are staggering. If such overlaps can happen, if they've ever happened, then the question isn't just what caused the flash, but what else came through with it. It invites a haunting contemplation. If the laws of physics were momentarily suspended or warped in that region of the sky, even for a second, how do we know something else didn't pass through? Not a ship, necessarily. Not a creature. But information. Radiation. A pattern of energy or frequency that wasn't present in our reality before that moment. We may not yet recognize it. We may never. But if the universe brushed against another for even a millisecond, then we were touched by something that doesn't belong to us. Something unknowable, unmeasurable, and possibly irreversible. And maybe that's the most compelling part of the theory. Not the drama of alternate realities or interdimensional travel, but the quiet terror of invisible consequence. That somewhere, in the unseen heart of our atmosphere, a crack appeared. And we didn't hear it. We didn't see it coming. We just saw the light it left behind. And if we entertain the notion that something crossed paths with us, even briefly, we must also entertain the reality that our understanding of time and space may be far more fragile than we've come to accept. Because when the boundary between dimensions bends or thins, it's not just the sky that reacts. The very fabric of causality, The sequence of events we trust to follow a clean and logical thread could become tangled, however briefly. It's not always dramatic, not always earth-shaking. But subtle distortions, strange echoes in our systems, unexplained surges or anomalies in behavior and perception, those may be the lingering fingerprints of such a fleeting encounter. What if the flash of light wasn't even meant for us? What if it was simply a misfired signal, a reflection from a dimension where physics play by an entirely different set of rules? In their world, it may have been no more than a pulse of data, an energy burst, or even a moment of travel. But to us, standing on this side of the veil, unprepared and unshielded, it manifests as a dissonant flicker in the sky, silent, unexplained, utterly alien. Not alien in the little green men sense, but alien in the way a mathematical equation might be to someone who doesn't even know numbers exist. The kind of foreign that doesn't come from the stars but from the unexplored layers of reality, stacked beside our own like invisible pages in a book. And consider this. Light, in any context, is not just illumination. It's information. Photons carry more than just brightness. They carry temperature, momentum, frequency, and often, something harder to quantify, an origin story. But if that flash came from somewhere that doesn't adhere to our familiar universal constants, then it may have arrived stripped of that story. No signature, no source, no trajectory. Just a blunt appearance, like a word spoken in a language no one has ever heard, let alone understood. Scientists might search for wavelengths, for particle trails, for a logical chain of causation, but what if there simply isn't one? What if it was never meant to be traced, because our tools, our equations, our foundational assumptions, are all tuned to a completely different narrative? This brings us into even more surreal territory, where the incident is less a signal and more a leak. In this sense, it's not an event in and of itself, but a symptom of something deeper. Imagine a dimensional layer shifting, not dramatically, not violently, but subtly misaligning. Like tectonic plates, only on a metaphysical level. The pressure builds, unnoticed, until something gives. And just like that, a pulse of light slips through, illuminating our sky like a breath exhaled from an unknown space. It's not hostile. It's not intentional. But it's real. And like a gas escaping from a fissure underground, the effect is both mysterious and slightly unnerving. What caused the shift? What else might follow it? And was this flash a one-time anomaly, or the first in a series of ripple events? And here's where it gets even stranger. If dimensional overlap is a possibility, even a remote one, then we have to acknowledge that time might not be entirely linear across all realms. In our universe, we measure causality in clean lines. This happened because that happened. But in another plane, effects might precede causes. Or events might loop, restart, or unfold in ways that feel entirely irrational by our standards. So when we saw that light, that burst without thunder, without reason, it may not have been from our present at all. It could have been a bleed-through from another time, a flare from a future that hasn't yet occurred, or a moment from a past that was never ours. In such a framework, we might be witnessing echoes of decisions not yet made, residues of movements we've never taken. The light may not be about us, but merely passing through us. This also begs the question, do such events go unnoticed more often than we think? Perhaps the silence and stillness of this flash, its refusal to announce itself with sound or shockwave, isn't because it was weak, but because it's common. So common, in fact, that we've simply never learned how to see it. Like the low hum of a frequency just outside our hearing range, or a subtle change in air pressure that only a sensitive instrument might detect. The idea is unsettling, but plausible. That the universe might be alive with these unrecorded, unexplained moments, flashes and whispers from places we don't yet understand, and we simply pass beneath them, unaware. In remote regions, particularly near the poles or over vast oceanic voids, there have been isolated reports, never confirmed, never taken seriously, of sudden, silent bursts of light above the clouds. Pilots call them ghost glows. Sailors describe them as false dawns. The phenomenon rarely makes headlines, because it's so transient, so seemingly inconsequential. But if even some of these instances are connected to the same mechanism behind this recent sky event, then we might be glimpsing the edges of a much wider pattern. One that doesn't just point to a single moment in time, but to a persistent, ambient instability. A slow hum in the machinery of reality itself. And maybe, just maybe, this flash wasn't a flare of warning or a technological hiccup. Maybe it was an invitation. A reminder that we are not alone, not in the extraterrestrial sense, but in the dimensional sense. That we are one of many iterations, many expressions of space and time. And sometimes those expressions blur. They kiss. They graze one another in the sky above, leaving behind only a hint, a light with no source, no sound, and no explanation. If this event, this singular, silent flash of brilliance across an unclouded sky, was indeed more than a meteorological fluke or an overlooked technical glitch, then its implications could stretch far beyond the realm of science and into the heart of what it means to be human. Because for all our advancements, all our accumulated knowledge, there remains something innately humbling about witnessing the unexplainable. A flash of light with no source, no sound, no storm, appearing against the quiet backdrop of an ordinary evening, it's a rupture in the familiar. And such ruptures, while unsettling, are also rare and precious. They remind us, even if just for a fleeting moment, that we are still students of the universe, not its masters. In a world saturated with information, where every phenomenon is swiftly categorized, documented, and explained, moments of true mystery feel almost like relics of a past age. We live surrounded by machines that measure, track, and analyze. We dissect the world into data points, trends, and probabilities. But when something happens that escapes our models, something so visually striking yet devoid of logical anchors, it strikes a deeper chord. It shakes loose that primal awareness buried in the core of every human being, that we don't know everything. That there are still thresholds we have not crossed, questions we have not even thought to ask. What if this was more than an anomaly? What if it was a mirror, held up to our collective perception, daring us to reconsider the neatness of our maps and the confidence in our equations? Humanity, for all its technological prowess, remains tethered to the instinctive need for meaning. We don't just observe the world, we interpret it. And a flash of light that comes from nowhere, with no sound, no storm, and no explanation, becomes more than a scientific curiosity. It becomes a canvas, a symbol, an invitation to question the structure we've built around our understanding of existence. Because moments like these, though brief, resonate on a level that data cannot chart. The average person might look up, see the flash, and feel a ripple of something they can't quite name: awe, fear, wonder, or some combination of all three. It's not just the event that matters, but the reaction it stirs. Children pausing mid-sentence. Adults gazing skyward with their conversations forgotten. A whole community tethered, even if for seconds, by the shared experience of something profound and unexplained. In a world increasingly divided, segmented by ideology and filtered through algorithms, the flash cuts through the noise. It's a moment that belongs to everyone, and no one. It cannot be bought, owned, or replicated. And that, perhaps, is part of its message. In a metaphorical sense, this silent flash might serve as a kind of cosmic punctuation mark. A brief, blinding pause in the narrative of our planet's day-to-day story. And like any good pause, it makes us reflect, not just on what has happened, but on where we are going. Are we so focused on decoding the universe that we've forgotten to be moved by it? Have we built walls of certainty so thick that we no longer feel the breeze of wonder on the other side? This moment, odd as it may seem, opens a door. Not necessarily to answers, but to questions. To curiosity. To possibility. And possibility is the soul of progress. Some might say it's nothing. Just light. Just photons. A trick of the atmosphere or a rogue electrical current. But even if that were true, what it became in the hearts and minds of those who witnessed it, that matters. Because it reminded us of the fragility of our knowledge, the beauty of the unknown, and the unshakable truth that we are part of a universe much larger and stranger than we allow ourselves to believe during our daily routines. It whispered, without words, that there is still room for all. And maybe that's the most important message of all. Because humanity has always needed moments like this, not just to advance, but to feel alive. From ancient civilizations interpreting eclipses as messages from the gods, to modern-day scientists trying to read cosmic radiation as echoes of the Big Bang, we have always looked to the sky not just for answers, but for purpose. That flash, strange and unaccounted for, joins a long lineage of celestial moments that have shaped the course of thought, belief, and ambition. And in the modern age, where skepticism often overshadows spirituality, perhaps we needed a new mystery, one not bound by religion or region, but born from the universe itself, to bring us back to that primal sense of connection. So what could this mean for humanity? It could mean that our chapter of certainty is closing, and a new one of curiosity is beginning. That we're being asked, once again, to look up, not just with cameras, but with open minds. It could mean we're on the cusp of a discovery so massive we don't yet have the language to describe it. Or maybe, simply, it means we are not alone in our quest for understanding. That there are still secrets the cosmos holds close, waiting for us to be ready to receive them. Not with machines, but with humility. And if nothing else, this unexplained brilliance in the night sky may serve as a silent reassurance that there is still wonder left in the world, not manufactured, not scripted, but raw and real. And perhaps that's what we needed more than anything, not another breakthrough, not another innovation, but a moment of stillness beneath the stars, where the only thing we could do was stare upward and remember how vast, how wild, and how deeply mysterious this universe still is. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the mysteries of the unknown, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps us continue exploring these fascinating topics together. And don't forget to subscribe, so you never miss another video that takes you to the edge of curiosity and beyond. We've got many more mind-bending mysteries to uncover, and you won't want to miss a single one. Thanks for watching, and stay curious.